The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate plains of western Arizona, as Cassie Reeves clutched her swollen belly, the conductor's stern face looming over her like a harbinger of doom. At 7 months pregnant with nowhere to go, the 22-year-old widow found herself in the most desperate situation of her life on this sweltering August day in 1885. "No ticket means no ride, madam." The conductor's voice cut through the rhythmic chugging of the train. His weathered face showed no sympathy as he gripped Cassie's arm, leading her toward the exit while the train slowed to a maintenance stop in the middle of nowhere. "Rules are rules. Please," Cassie begged, her throat tight with unshed tears. "I lost everything in Santa Fe. My husband's been dead 3 months. I'm trying to reach my cousin in Flagstaff." She fumbled in her pocket, pulling out a handful of coins. "This is all I have. Please, for the baby." The conductor's face hardened as he pocketed her meager offering. "Not even half fare, off you go." The few passengers in the third-class car averted their eyes, all except one. A tall figure rose from his seat at the back of the car, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. "That's no way to treat a lady," came a deep voice, smooth as aged whiskey. Cassie turned, brushing away tears with a dusty hand, to see a man approaching. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw peppered with stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "This doesn't concern you, mister," the conductor snapped. "Xavier Pendleton," the stranger introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat, "and I'm making it my concern." He reached into his vest pocket and extracted a crisp bill, pressing it into the conductor's palm. "That should cover the lady's fare to Flagstaff with plenty to spare." The conductor hesitated, looking from the money to Xavier's steady gaze. Wordlessly, he pocketed the bill, released Cassie's arm, and moved along to the next car. "You can have my seat, madam," Xavier said, gesturing toward the back of the car. "It's by the window, might catch a breeze." Cassie stood frozen, one hand protectively over her belly, the other clutching her worn carpet bag. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the train's rumble as it began moving again. Xavier's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Because my mama would tan my hide if she knew I sat by while a woman carrying new life was thrown to the wolves." He reached for her bag. "May I?" As Cassie relinquished her bag, their fingers brushed, sending an unexpected jolt through her grief-numbed heart. "Thank you, Mr. Pendleton." "Just Xavier, madam." He guided her to his seat, careful not to touch her more than necessary, respecting her condition and solitude. Cassie sank gratefully into the seat, feeling the weight of the day's fear lifting slightly from her shoulders. Through the window, the vast Arizona territory stretched endlessly, beautiful and brutal in equal measure, just like life itself. "Where will you sit?" she asked, suddenly concerned. Xavier settled on his bedroll in the aisle beside her seat. "I've slept under the stars for weeks at a time, madam. This train floor is practically luxury." Despite herself, Cassie smiled. It felt foreign on her face after months of grief. "I'm Cassie Reeves." "Pleasure to meet you properly, Mrs. Reeves, though I wish it were under better circumstances." As the train rumbled through the gathering dusk, Cassie found herself sharing more than she had intended. How her husband Thomas had died in a mining accident. How his family blamed her for his death, claiming he wouldn't have taken such dangerous work if she hadn't been expecting. How they'd turned her out with nothing but the clothes on her back and what little she could carry. Xavier listened without interruption, occasionally offering a canteen of water or a strip of jerky from his provisions. His quiet strength was comforting in a way she hadn't experienced since Thomas died. "My cousin Martha writes that Flagstaff is growing," Cassie said, fatigue evident in her voice. She says women with education can find work as teachers or clerks. You're educated? Xavier asked, genuine interest in his voice. My father believed girls should learn as much as boys. I taught at a small school before I married. Pride crept into her voice despite her circumstances. A teacher, Xavier nodded appreciatively. Flagstaff would be lucky to have you. As night fell across the desert, the rocking of the train lulled most passengers to sleep. Xavier remained vigilant, his back against the seat where Cassie had finally succumbed to exhaustion. He watched the moonlight illuminate her face, the gentle curve of her cheek, the protective way her hands cradled her unborn child even in sleep. Something protective stirred in him. He'd spent 5 years driving cattle across these territories, moving from ranch to ranch, never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments. Yet something about this woman's quiet courage touched him deeply. The train whistle pierced the night as they approached a water stop. Xavier stood, stretching his tall frame, and made his way to the rear platform for some fresh air. The night air was cool against his face, stars brilliantly clear in the vast desert sky. Beautiful, isn't it? Came a soft voice behind him. He turned to find Cassie standing in the doorway, one hand bracing herself against the frame. You should be resting, he said, automatically offering his arm for support. She accepted it, stepping carefully onto the platform. I've been doing nothing but sitting for days. The baby gets restless. She gazed up at the star-filled sky. Thomas used to say that heaven looks down on us through those stars. Xavier followed her gaze upward. My father said something similar, that each star is the soul of someone watching over us. He hesitated. I lost him 3 years ago. I'm sorry, she said simply, understanding in her voice. They stood in companionable silence until the train whistle signaled departure was imminent. Xavier helped Cassie back inside, his hand lingering on her elbow a moment longer than necessary. Morning brought with it the vastness of the northern Arizona landscape, red rock formations rising majestically against the clear blue sky. Cassie awoke to find a fresh canteen of water and a cloth-wrapped package beside her. The station master at the water stop was selling breakfast, Xavier explained when he noticed her curious gaze. Nothing fancy, just biscuits and some preserves. You've already been too kind, Cassie protested, even as her stomach growled audibly. Xavier smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Eat, Mrs. Reeves, for the little one if not for yourself. The biscuits were slightly hard but fresh enough, the preserves sweet and tangy. Cassie found herself ravenous, realizing she hadn't had a proper meal in days. What takes you to Flagstaff? She asked between bites, curious about her benefactor. Work, Xavier replied. I've been offered a position at the Thompson Ranch outside town, foreman with a cabin of my own. That sounds promising, Cassie said, more stable than driving cattle. That's the hope, he admitted. At 30, a man starts thinking about putting down roots. The conversation flowed easily between them as the miles passed. Xavier spoke of his years working ranches across the territories, of stampedes outrun and rivers forded. Cassie shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her brief teaching career, and the whirlwind romance with Thomas that had brought her west. He was passing through on his way to the silver mines, she explained. Stayed in town only a week, but by the end of it, he'd convinced me to marry him and follow him to Santa Fe. He must have been quite persuasive, Xavier observed. He was, Cassie said softly, memory warming her voice. Full of dreams and so certain everything would work out perfectly. Her hand moved unconsciously to her belly. We were so happy when we learned about the baby. Xavier nodded, understanding the unspoken grief. Thomas sounds like a good man. He was, Cassie agreed, but also reckless. The mine foreman warned him the new tunnel wasn't fully supported. She closed her eyes briefly. His family said I drove him to take risks, needing extra money for the baby. That's not fair, Xavier said firmly. A man makes his own choices. Fair or not, they made their feelings clear at the funeral. Cassie's voice grew distant. My mother-in-law gave me 3 days to vacate their home, said I was never truly family. Xavier's jaw tightened. Some folks forget their Christian charity when it's most needed. The train began to slow as they approached a small town nestled among pine trees. Williams, Xavier explained. Last stop before Flagstaff. Several passengers departed while others boarded, including a large man whose expensive suit and gold watch chain marked him as a man of means. He surveyed the car with obvious distaste before reluctantly taking a seat across from Cassie. Cattle baron or mine owner, Xavier murmured to Cassie. Too clean for a working rancher. The newcomer caught Xavier's assessment and frowned. You have business with me, cowboy. None at all, sir, Xavier replied evenly, though his posture straightened subtly. The man's gaze shifted to Cassie, lingering on her swollen belly with undisguised judgment before he turned pointedly away. Cassie felt herself flush with shame. Xavier leaned closer to her. Pay him no mind, Mrs. Reeves. Some men have wealth but no true riches. The sentiment warmed her, but as the train pulled away from Williams, Cassie felt a sudden sharp pain grip her abdomen. She gasped, clutching at her belly. Mrs. Reeves. Xavier was immediately alert, concern etched on his features. It's nothing, she tried to assure him, but another pain seized her stronger than before. Fear bloomed in her chest. It's too early, she whispered. Xavier's expression shifted from concern to determination. How far apart are the pains? I don't know, Cassie admitted, fighting panic. This is the second one, but it felt different from the usual discomfort. Xavier glanced around the car. Most passengers were minding their own business, but the well-dressed man was watching with obvious displeasure. Conductor, Xavier called as the man passed through the car. The conductor, a different man from the previous day, approached with a questioning look. The lady needs assistance, Xavier explained. She's having pains and her time isn't due yet. The conductor's expression turned worried. We're an hour from Flagstaff. No doctor until then. Is there any private space on the train? A baggage car, perhaps? Xavier pressed. There's the mail car, the conductor said hesitantly. Not comfortable, but private. Another pain gripped Cassie and she couldn't suppress a moan. The well-dressed man across the aisle stood abruptly. I will not share a car with a woman in such a condition, he declared loudly. It's indecent. Xavier stood to his full height, eyes narrowing. What's indecent is your lack of compassion, sir. The man sputtered, but the conductor intervened. Please, gentlemen, we don't need trouble. He turned to Xavier. I'll take the lady to the mail car. There's an attendant there who can help while I fetch the doctor at the next stop. Xavier gathered their meager belongings while the conductor helped Cassie to her feet. As they made their way slowly through the swaying train, Cassie clung to Xavier's arm, her face pale with fear. Don't leave, she whispered as another pain seized her. I won't, he promised, his voice steady despite the worry in his eyes. The mail car was cluttered but clean, with enough space cleared among the mail bags to make a makeshift bed. The attendant, a young man named Billy, looked terrified at the prospect of a woman in labor, but hurried to fetch water and clean linens from the dining car. Left alone momentarily with Cassie, Xavier knelt beside her improvised bed. You're going to be fine, he assured her, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. Doctors say sometimes these are just practice pains. Cassie nodded, wanting to believe him, but the increasing intensity of the contractions made her doubt. "If something happens to me," she began. "Nothing's happening to you," Xavier cut her off gently but firmly. "You focus on breathing easy and thinking good thoughts." When Billy returned with supplies, Xavier sent him to find any women passengers willing to help. To their relief, an elderly woman introduced herself as Mrs. Henderson, a midwife's daughter. "Let me have a look at you, dear," she said kindly to Cassie, shooing the men to the far end of the car while she examined her. After a tense few minutes, Mrs. Henderson called Xavier back. "False labor," she announced, patting Cassie's hand. "Brought on by stress and travel, I'd wager. The pain should ease if she rests properly." Relief flooded Xavier's face. "You're certain as anyone can be without a doctor," Mrs. Henderson replied. "I've seen enough births to know the difference. This little one isn't ready to meet the world just yet." Cassie began to cry softly, emotional from the fear and subsequent relief. Xavier hesitantly took her hand, his calloused thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "See, everything will be fine," he said softly. Mrs. Henderson watched the exchange with knowing eyes. "I'll stay with her until we reach Flagstaff," she offered. "You look like you could use some air, young man." Xavier nodded gratefully, stepping out onto the small platform between cars. The wind whipped at his hat and he removed it, letting the cool air clear his head. The minutes of uncertainty had affected him more deeply than he'd expected. The thought of Cassie facing childbirth alone on a train, or worse, losing her or the baby, had gripped him with a fear he hadn't experienced since his father's final illness. When he returned to the mail car, Cassie was sleeping peacefully, her breathing even, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Mrs. Henderson sat nearby, knitting from a small bag she'd produced from her pocket. "She'll be all right," the older woman assured him quietly. "But she needs rest and proper care, not to be jostled about on trains." "Her cousin will look after her in Flagstaff," Xavier said. Mrs. Henderson gave him a penetrating look. "And you? What's your interest in this young widow's welfare, Mr. Pendleton?" Xavier shifted uncomfortably. "Just being neighborly, madam." The woman hummed skeptically. "In my 70 years, I've observed that men don't typically give up their train seats and keep vigil for mere neighborliness." Xavier had no response to that, his own feelings too new and confused to articulate. Cassie stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Seeing Xavier, she smiled weakly. "The baby's settled," she murmured. "I think he was just protesting the uncomfortable seats." "He?" Xavier asked, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Or she," Cassie amended. "Thomas was convinced we'd have a son." Mrs. Henderson excused herself tactfully, claiming a need to check on her belongings in the passenger car. Alone with Cassie, Xavier sat on a mail bag near her makeshift bed. "You gave me quite a scare," he admitted. "I scared myself," Cassie replied. "All I could think was that I couldn't lose this baby too." Her hand moved protectively over her belly. "It's all I have left of him," Xavier nodded, understanding her fear. "When we get to Flagstaff, you should see a proper doctor." "I will," she promised, "if Martha can afford it." The train whistle sounded, announcing their approach to Flagstaff. Xavier helped Cassie sit up slowly, supporting her back with his strong hand. "You think you can walk to the passenger car?" he asked. "Or should I carry you?" Cassie blushed at the thought. "I can walk, though I might need your arm for support." As they made their way carefully back to their seats to gather their belongings, Cassie was acutely aware of Xavier's solid presence beside her, his arm strong and steady under her hand. The well-dressed man from earlier was mercifully absent from the car. The train pulled into Flagstaff station with a screech of brakes and billowing steam. Through the window, Cassie could see a bustling platform, so different from the small depot at Williams. Flagstaff was a proper town, with wood frame buildings lining the street beyond the station and pine trees framing the backdrop. Xavier helped her down the steps to the platform, where passengers were greeting family or hiring wagons to their destinations. Cassie looked around anxiously for her cousin. She said she'd meet the train, Cassie murmured, scanning the crowd. A harried-looking woman with a toddler on her hip approached them. Cassie Reeves, Martha, Cassie's face lit with relief. The women embraced awkwardly, the toddler squirming between them. Martha looked her cousin up and down, concern evident in her expression. "You're so pale. Was the journey terrible?" Martha asked, then noticed Xavier standing respectfully to the side. "And who's this?" "Xavier Pendleton," he introduced himself with a tip of his hat. "Just lending a hand to Mrs. Reeves during the journey." Martha's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Pendleton." She turned back to Cassie. "We should get you home." "You look dead on your feet." Cassie hesitated, looking back at Xavier. "I don't know how to thank you properly." Xavier shook his head. "No thanks needed, Mrs. Reeves." "At least let me repay the train fare," Cassie insisted, though they both knew she had no means to do so. "Consider it a gift," Xavier said firmly, "for you and the little one." Martha watched this exchange with interest. "Mr. Pendleton, might I ask where you're staying in Flagstaff? Perhaps we could have you to dinner sometime as a proper thank you." "I'm heading to the Thompson Ranch," Xavier replied, "starting work as foreman there tomorrow." "Why, that's not 3 miles from our place," Martha exclaimed. "John, that's my husband, does business with Mr. Thompson regularly." A flicker of something like hope crossed Cassie's face. "So we might see you again." "It appears likely, Mrs. Reeves," Xavier said, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "I wish you well." As Martha led Cassie toward a waiting wagon, Cassie looked back once to see Xavier still standing on the platform, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. He raised a hand in farewell, and she returned the gesture, a strange mixture of gratitude and something undefined stirring in her heart. Martha and John Weston's home was modest but comfortable, a 2-room cabin with a small addition that Martha explained would be Cassie's room until after the baby came. John, a stocky, bearded man with kind eyes, welcomed Cassie warmly, showing none of the judgment she'd feared. That night, after a simple but satisfying meal, Cassie sat on the edge of her narrow bed, rubbing her aching back. Through the thin walls, she could hear Martha and John speaking in low voices. "The poor girl," Martha was saying. "Thomas barely cold in his grave and his family turning her out like that." "It's not right," John agreed, his deep voice rumbling. "But she's safe now and we'll look after her. That cowboy who helped her, there was something there, I think." "Martha, don't go matchmaking," John chided gently. "She's in mourning and expecting another man's child." "I'm not saying now," Martha defended herself, "but eventually. A woman alone with a child needs a good man, John." Cassie pressed her hands to her heated cheeks, embarrassed by the direction of the conversation, but unable to deny that Xavier Pendleton had stirred feelings in her she'd thought buried with Thomas. Guilt immediately followed. How could she even think of another man when she carried her husband's child? Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams a confused mixture of Thomas's face, the rumbling train, and Xavier's steady presence beside her. The next few weeks passed in a blur of domestic activity. Martha helped Cassie sew a layette for the baby from fabric remnants, while John built a small cradle in the evenings after returning from his work at the lumber mill. Cassie insisted on contributing to the household, taking over much of the cooking and helping with Martha's 2-year-old son, Ethan. True to Martha's prediction, the Westons' path crossed with Xavier's sooner rather than later. John returned from town one Saturday afternoon with news that Mr. Thompson was hosting a small gathering the following day after church services, and the Westons, including Cassie, were invited. "It's nothing formal," John assured them. "Thompson likes to get the families of the men who work with him together once in a while, says it builds community." "Will Mr. Pendleton be there?" Martha asked innocently, ignoring Cassie's warning glance. "I expect so, being the new foreman," John replied, oblivious to the undercurrents. "Thompson speaks highly of him already." Cassie found herself unusually concerned with her appearance the next morning as she dressed for church. Her condition limited her options to the two dresses Martha had altered for her, but she took extra care with her hair, pinning the honey-brown locks into a neat arrangement at the nape of her neck. Martha noticed, but tactfully said nothing, merely helping with the buttons at the back of Cassie's blue calico dress. The small church was filled to capacity when they arrived, the congregation a mix of town folk, ranch workers, and a few Native Americans from the nearby reservation. Cassie felt eyes on her as John led them to a pew, her condition impossible to disguise. She held her head high, remembering Xavier's words about dignity. She spotted him 3 rows ahead, his broad shoulders unmistakable even in his Sunday best. As if sensing her gaze, he turned slightly, catching her eye. He nodded in acknowledgement, a small smile warming his features. After the service, as the congregation spilled into the churchyard, Xavier made his way to their small group. He greeted John with a firm handshake before turning to Cassie. "Mrs. Reeves," he said, removing his hat, "you're looking well. Flagstaff agrees with you." "Thank you, Mr. Pendleton," Cassie replied, absurdly pleased by the observation. "How are you finding your position at the Thompson Ranch?" "Challenging but satisfying," he answered. "Mr. Thompson runs a tight operation." John joined their conversation, discussing cattle prices and the coming winter, while Martha drew Cassie aside under the pretense of adjusting Ethan's collar. "He can't take his eyes off you," Martha whispered conspiratorially. "Don't be ridiculous," Cassie protested, though she couldn't help a quick glance in Xavier's direction, only to find his gaze indeed on her. "He's just being polite." "Polite doesn't make a man look at a woman like that," Martha insisted with a knowing smile. "Will you be all right if we ride to the Thompson place with the Millers?" John promised to help Samuel with his wagon wheel. "Of course," Cassie replied, confused by the sudden change of subject. "Good, because Mr. Pendleton has offered to drive you in his buggy," Martha announced triumphantly. "Said it would be more comfortable for your condition than our wagon." Before Cassie could protest, Martha had returned to the men, confirming the arrangement with a satisfied smile. Xavier appeared at Cassie's side moments later. "I hope I haven't presumed too much," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "I thought a spring buggy might be easier on your back than their farm wagon." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Cassie deeply. "That's very kind of you." The Thompson Ranch was impressive. The main house a large 2-story structure with a wide porch and gleaming windows. Smaller buildings dotted the property: bunkhouse, barn, cookhouse, and what Cassie assumed must be Xavier's cabin, set slightly apart near a stand of pines. The gathering was larger than Cassie had expected, with at least 30 people milling about the yard or seated at long tables set up under a canvas awning. Mrs. Thompson, a plump, energetic woman in her 50s, greeted each arrival personally, including Cassie. "Mrs. Reeves." "Martha's told me all about you," she said warmly. "You must be so tired carrying in this heat. Come, I've saved a comfortable chair in the shade for you." Cassie was touched by the thoughtfulness, having expected more of the judgment she'd faced in Santa Fe. As Mrs. Thompson led her to a cushioned rocking chair under a large cottonwood. Cassie noticed several other pregnant women or mothers with infants among the guests. "When are you due, dear?" Mrs. Thompson asked as Cassie settled into the chair. "November, the doctor says," Cassie replied, "though he thinks it might be earlier given the baby's size." Mrs. Thompson nodded knowingly. "First babies often come early. I've had 5 myself, so I know the signs." She patted Cassie's hand. "You're welcome here anytime. A young widow needs community." The afternoon passed pleasantly, with abundant food, music from a fiddle and banjo duo, and conversation that never strayed into uncomfortable territory. Cassie found herself relaxing, laughing at John's stories and enjoying the simple pleasure of belonging somewhere again. Xavier moved throughout the gathering, his duties as foreman requiring him to speak with various ranch hands and guests, but she often caught him looking in her direction. Late in the afternoon, as the gathering began to disperse, he finally approached her chair. "Would you care for a short walk?" he asked, offering his arm. "There's a view of the mountains from behind the house that's worth seeing." Cassie hesitated, aware of Martha's interested gaze from across the yard, but the genuine warmth in Xavier's eyes decided her. "I'd like that," she said, allowing him to help her from the chair. They walked slowly, Xavier matching his long stride to her shorter, more deliberate steps. The path behind the house led to a small rise, where the San Francisco peaks were indeed spectacular in the late afternoon light. "It's beautiful," Cassie breathed, taking in the vista of mountains against the azure sky. "I thought you might appreciate it," Xavier said. "I find myself looking for beautiful things to share with you." The simple statement, delivered without artifice, sent a flutter through Cassie's heart. She looked up at him, finding his gaze steady on her face. "Mr. Pendleton, Xavier," he corrected gently. "After everything, I think we can dispense with formalities, don't you?" Cassie nodded, suddenly shy. "Xavier, I don't know what to make of this." She gestured vaguely between them. "I'm still in mourning, still carrying Thomas's child." "I know," Xavier said quietly. "And I would never disrespect that grief or rush you into anything you're not ready for. But I also won't pretend I don't feel something for you, Cassie. Something I've never felt before." The use of her given name, spoken with such tenderness, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "I feel it too," she admitted, barely above a whisper. "And it frightens me." Xavier took her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture now becoming familiar. "Then we'll take it slowly. Get to know each other properly. All I ask is that you don't close the door on what might be." Cassie looked down at their joined hands, his tan and calloused, hers pale and slender. "I won't," she promised. The moment was interrupted by Martha calling Cassie's name from the yard. It was time to depart. Xavier escorted her back to the gathering, his hand supportive at her elbow. In the weeks that followed, Xavier became a regular visitor at the Weston home. He would appear on Sunday afternoons after church, sometimes bearing small gifts, a jar of honey from the hives at the Thompson ranch, a wooden toy he had whittled for Ethan, fresh trout he had caught in the nearby creek. For Cassie, he once brought a book of poetry he had purchased from a traveling salesman, remembering her mention of enjoying verse. These gestures, small but thoughtful, endeared him not only to Cassie, but to the entire Weston household. Even John, initially protective of his wife's vulnerable cousin, came to appreciate Xavier's steady character and work ethic. As September gave way to October, Cassie's condition became increasingly uncomfortable. Her back ached constantly, and sleep proved elusive. The doctor in town, upon examining her, confirmed that the baby was large and might indeed come earlier than November. "You're healthy and the baby is positioned properly," he reassured her. "But I want you resting as much as possible these next few weeks." This decree limited Cassie's activities considerably. Unable to attend church or make the journey to town, she found herself confined largely to the Weston cabin. Xavier, learning of this from John, took to visiting in the evenings after his work was done, often bringing his dinner to share with the family. On one such evening in mid-October, after John and Martha had retired and Ethan was asleep, Xavier and Cassie sat on the small porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. Despite the growing chill, Cassie found the fresh air a relief after being indoors all day. "I've been thinking about names," she said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Thomas wanted to name a boy after his father, Samuel, but I'm not sure now." Xavier nodded thoughtfully. "What names do you favor for a boy, perhaps David or James?" She rubbed her belly absently. "For a girl, maybe Elizabeth or Grace. All fine names," Xavier approved. "Strong but gentle like their mother." Cassie smiled at the compliment, then winced as the baby delivered a particularly forceful kick. Without thinking, she reached for Xavier's hand, placing it on her belly. "Feel that? He's quite the little fighter." Xavier's eyes widened in wonder as the baby kicked again, directly against his palm. "That's amazing," he said softly. "A new life, right there under my hand." The intimacy of the moment struck them both simultaneously. Cassie's breath caught as Xavier's gaze met hers, the wonder in his eyes shifting to something deeper, more intense. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned closer. His lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it was barely a whisper, yet it sent electricity coursing through Cassie's veins. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of regret or discomfort. "I'm sorry if that was too forward," he began. Cassie shook her head, cutting off his apology. "It wasn't." Her hand found his where it still rested on her belly. I think Thomas would want me to be happy eventually." Xavier brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I want nothing more than your happiness, Cassie. Yours and the little ones." 2 nights later, Cassie woke with a gasp, a familiar pain gripping her abdomen. This time, she knew it was no false alarm. The baby was coming almost 3 weeks early. Martha was at her side within moments, John already pulling on his boots to fetch the doctor from town. As another contraction seized her, Cassie gripped Martha's hand. "Xavier," she gasped. "Can someone tell Xavier?" Martha exchanged a look with John. "It's the middle of the night, Cassie, and the ranch is 3 miles, please," Cassie interrupted, her voice strained but determined. "I want him here." John nodded once, understanding. "I'll stop at the ranch on my way to town." But the doctor comes first. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and focused effort for Cassie. The doctor arrived shortly after dawn, his experienced hands checking the baby's position and Cassie's progress. "Everything's proceeding normally," he assured her. First babies often take their time. By mid-morning, Cassie was exhausted, the contractions coming closer together, but the baby still not making its final journey. Through the haze of pain, she heard the sound of hoofbeats in the yard, followed by a familiar deep voice speaking urgently to John. Moments later, Xavier appeared in the doorway of her room, his face drawn with concern and something that looked remarkably like love. "Cassie," he breathed, moving to her bedside. "John found me breaking horses at the far pasture. I came as soon as I could." She reached for his hand, drawing strength from his solid presence. "You're here now," she managed between breaths. "That's what matters." The doctor, returning from washing his hands, raised an eyebrow at Xavier's presence but said nothing. Martha quietly explained that Xavier was a close friend of the family, and the doctor seemed to accept this, focusing on Cassie's condition. "It won't be long now," he announced after examining her again. "The baby's head is engaged. When I tell you to push, Cassie, I need you to give it everything you have." Xavier made to leave, assuming his presence would be unwelcome for the actual birth, but Cassie's grip on his hand tightened. "Stay," she whispered. "Please." So he stayed, holding her hand, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement as she labored to bring her child into the world. When the final moment came, Cassie's cry of effort gave way to the thin wail of a newborn. A boy. The doctor announced triumphantly, lifting the squalling infant for Cassie to see before handing him to Martha for cleaning. Tears streamed down Cassie's face as she collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but radiant. "A son," she whispered. "Thomas's son." Xavier pressed a kiss to her forehead, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "He's perfect, Cassie, just like his mother." Martha returned moments later with the swaddled infant, placing him gently in Cassie's arms. The tiny face, red and wrinkled but undeniably beautiful, peered up at her with unfocused eyes. A tuft of dark hair, so like Thomas's, adorned his head. "Hello, little one," Cassie whispered, tracing a finger along his cheek. "Welcome to the world." Xavier looked down at mother and child, his heart so full it threatened to burst. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to spend the rest of his life protecting them both. "What will you name him?" Martha asked softly. Cassie looked up at Xavier, then back to her son. "James," she decided. "James Thomas Reeves." The days following James's birth were a whirlwind of adjustment and learning. The baby proved to have a healthy appetite and strong lungs, making his needs known without hesitation. Cassie, recovering from the birth, was grateful for Martha's experienced help and the doctor's regular visits to check on both mother and child. Xavier returned to his duties at the ranch, but rode over every evening without fail, often bringing supplies from town or fresh food from the ranch kitchen. His devotion was obvious to everyone, including Mr. Thompson, who began to tease his foreman about his frequent absences from the bunkhouse dinner table. "If you're going to spend every evening at the Westons, you might as well move your things closer to town," Thompson joked one morning as they discussed the day's work. Xavier looked up sharply. "Sir?" Thompson's weathered face softened. "Xavier, I've known John Weston for 15 years. His cousin's situation has been the talk of the town, as has your interest in her. I'm not blind." Xavier shifted uncomfortably. "I respect Mrs. Reeves greatly." "As you should," Thompson agreed. "But there's more than respect in the way you look at her, and that's not a criticism, son. A woman alone with a baby needs a good man, especially out here." The words echoed Martha's from weeks earlier, striking Xavier with their simple truth. He had been cautious, not wanting to rush Cassie or appear disrespectful to Thomas's memory. But the pull between them was undeniable, growing stronger with each passing day. That evening, as James slept peacefully in his cradle and the Westons tactfully retired early, Xavier found himself alone with Cassie by the fireplace. She looked tired but content, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way he found utterly captivating. "You're staring," she observed with a small smile. "You're beautiful," he replied simply. A blush colored her cheeks. "I'm a mess. I haven't properly done my hair in days, and this dress has seen better times." Xavier moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Cassie Reeves, you are the most beautiful woman I've ever known, and it has nothing to do with your hair or your dress." Her breath caught at the intensity in his voice. "Xavier, I love you," he said, the words falling from his lips with the weight of absolute truth. "I've loved you since I saw you standing in that train car, dignity intact despite everything. I love your courage, your kindness, your strength. I love the way you care for James, the way you make a room brighter just by being in it." Tears filled Cassie's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I wasn't looking for love again. I thought that part of my life was over. But then there you were, offering your seat to a stranger." Xavier brought one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I don't want to rush you, and I know James is still so young, but I need you to know that whenever you're ready, I want to make you my wife. I want to be a father to James, to give him my name and my protection." "You already love him," Cassie observed softly. "How could I not? He's part of you." Cassie leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "I don't need more time, Xavier. Life out here is too uncertain, too precious to waste. If you're sure, truly sure that you want a widow with another man's child—" "I've never been more certain of anything," Xavier interrupted firmly. "Then yes," Cassie said, her voice steady despite the tears still streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, I will marry you." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed the promise, gentle at first but deepening as they poured their hearts into the connection. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I should speak to John," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Ask for his blessing as the head of your family here." Cassie laughed softly. "Martha will be insufferable. She's been hinting at this for weeks." "Smart woman," Xavier murmured, pressing another quick kiss to Cassie's lips before rising. "I should go. It's late and you need your rest." "Or you could stay," Cassie suggested, then blushed at her own boldness. "Not like that, not yet, but just be here when I wake up, when James wakes up." Xavier's heart swelled at the simple request, the trust it implied. "John and Martha will understand," Cassie finished for him. "The settee is perfectly comfortable. I've napped there myself." Unable to deny her anything, Xavier agreed, settling on the narrow settee while Cassie retired to her room with a final shy smile. Despite the cramped accommodations, he slept better than he had in weeks, knowing she was just a room away, safe and soon to be his. Morning brought the expected teasing from Martha and a gruff, but approving nod from John when Xavier formally asked for Cassie's hand. The couple decided on a simple ceremony before the month's end, seeing no reason to delay what their hearts had already decided. The wedding took place on a crisp November afternoon, the church filled with friends from town and the ranch. Mr. Thompson had insisted on hosting the celebration afterward at the ranch, an offer that touched both Cassie and Xavier deeply. As Cassie stood before the minister in a dress of pale blue, Martha had insisted she not wear widow's black for a wedding with James cradled in her arms. She felt a profound sense of rightness. Xavier stood tall beside her, his face solemn but his eyes alight with joy as they spoke their vows. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "Mr. Pendleton, you may kiss your bride." Xavier's kiss was gentle but full of promise, mindful of the baby between them. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Cassie felt Thomas's presence briefly, like a warm breeze passing through her heart, not with jealousy or regret, but with blessing. The celebration at the Thompson Ranch lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed an army. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Xavier found Cassie sitting by the fire, James sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Mrs. Pendleton," he said, the name like honey on his tongue. "May I have this dance?" "I should put James down first," Cassie replied, smiling up at her new husband. Martha appeared as if summoned. "I'll take him. My room's all prepared for the little one tonight." With James safely handed over to his honorary aunt, Xavier led Cassie to where couples were dancing to a slow waltz. He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair as they moved together. "Happy," he murmured against her temple. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his strength. I never thought I could feel this way again. This is just the beginning, Xavier promised. We have our whole lives ahead of us. Later that night, in the privacy of Xavier's cabin, their now husband and wife consummated their marriage with tender passion. Xavier's touches were reverent, mindful of Cassie's still healing body, but no less ardent for their gentleness. When they finally lay tangled together in the afterglow, Cassie traced the line of Xavier's jaw with wonder. "I think I've loved you since you stood up to that conductor," she confessed. "I just couldn't admit it to myself then." Xavier kissed her palm. "I knew I was in trouble the moment I saw you stand straight and proud despite everything. You had such dignity, such strength." "You saw me when I felt invisible," Cassie said softly. "That's a gift I can never repay." "Your love is repayment enough," Xavier assured her, pulling her closer against his side. "That and watching James grow, maybe giving him brothers and sisters someday." The thought of expanding their family brought a warm glow to Cassie's heart. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Very much." Life settled into a rhythm for the Pendleton family. Xavier continued his work as foreman, earning the respect of the ranch hands and Mr. Thompson's increasing trust. Cassie focused on creating a home in their cabin, which Xavier steadily improved with additional rooms and comforts as James grew. The boy thrived under the love of both his mother and the man he would come to know as his father. Though Xavier was not his blood, no one could doubt the bond between them. Xavier taught James to ride almost before he could walk, fashioned him toy horses and cattle, and read to him every night before bed. As James's first birthday approached, Cassie discovered she was expecting again. The news delighted Xavier beyond measure, his hand constantly finding its way to her still flat belly in wonder. "This time I'll be with you from the beginning," he promised. "Every step of the way." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with none of the stress and fear that had marked Cassie's time carrying James. In late summer of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth, a robust baby with Xavier's storm-gray eyes and Cassie's honey-brown hair. James, not quite 2, was fascinated by his tiny sister, constantly wanting to touch her and bring her his favorite toys. Xavier's heart nearly burst with pride watching his son, for James was his son in every way that mattered, protect his baby sister with such instinctive care. As the years passed, the Pendleton family continued to grow and flourish. A third child, another boy they named William, joined them in 1889. By then, Xavier had saved enough to purchase a small ranch of his own adjacent to the Thompson property, allowing them to build a larger home and establish their own cattle operation. Mr. Thompson, having no sons of his own, had become a mentor to Xavier, teaching him the business side of ranching, and eventually offering him a partnership that would ensure the continued success of both their operations. Cassie, meanwhile, had begun teaching again, first just James and the children of nearby ranchers, then eventually in a small schoolhouse built on the boundary between the Thompson and Pendleton properties. Her reputation as a kind but firm teacher spread throughout the area, and soon families from as far as 10 miles away were sending their children to learn from Mrs. Pendleton. In the spring of 1895, a decade after that fateful train journey, Cassie and Xavier sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. James, nearly 10 now, was showing 5-year-old William how to throw a lasso, while 8-year-old Sarah supervised with all the authority of an older sister. "You ever think about that day on the train?" Cassie asked, her hand finding Xavier's as it had countless times over the years. "Often," Xavier admitted. "I thank God for that conductor's hard heart." Cassie laughed softly. "That's a strange thing to be thankful for." If he hadn't been so rigid about the rules, I might never have noticed you, might never have offered my seat. Xavier squeezed her hand. One small moment changed everything. For both of us, Cassie agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Pendleton family gathered for dinner in their comfortable home. Looking around the table at her children's faces, James with Thomas's dark hair, but Xavier's steady gaze, Sarah with her father's determined chin, William with his mother's gentle smile, Cassie felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. From desperation on a dusty train platform to this life of love and purpose, the journey had not been without its hardships, but every step had led her home. To Xavier, to their children, to this life they had built together. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Cassie and Xavier stood on their porch, arms around each other as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "You remember what you told me about the stars?" Cassie asked softly. "That first night on the train." Xavier nodded, his cheek resting against her hair. "That each one is the soul of someone watching over us." "I believe Thomas is up there," Cassie said, her voice peaceful, "watching over James, glad that we found each other." Xavier tightened his arms around her. "I believe that too." In the vast Arizona sky, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the darkness, as if in affirmation. And in that moment, standing in the circle of her husband's arms with their children sleeping safely nearby, Cassie Pendleton knew with absolute certainty that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as its greatest challenges, that sometimes being thrown from a train can lead you exactly where you're meant to be.